Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Titus. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about another plant care tip on one of my favorite plants to look after, and that is the oregano. Now this variety is actually the Mexican and Philippine oregano, and if you're watching this video, you've probably bought one or finally owned one of these, and it's actually one of the super plants that have been quite popular back in the Philippines, and I believe it's getting some traction here where I am in now in Australia as well. So with this plant, there's actually heaps of things that are really good about this. Now, some of the beneficial properties of this plant is apparently it contains a lot of antioxidants. It often acts as an antibacterial, antiviral, and also an anti-inflammatory, amongst other beneficial things if people ingest this. Please do your research online and also seek medical advice before actually trying anything out, especially if you have a likelihood of developing anaphylactic reactions. Now, I'm not here to give medical advice. I'm here to just talk to you guys about this particular plant because it's something that's quite popular in the Philippines, especially when I was still young. A lot of older adults actually use this as a traditional medication. So yeah, just be very careful, especially when you're giving it to kids or yourself. I myself actually like to brew this as a tea because it's got that really nice minty taste to it. Now, the other thing that you will notice here as well is that it's got a really nice green foliage, and it's also quite nice and luscious and thick as well, if my camera will actually allow me to focus onto it. It's actually something that is very easy to look after. It's very hairy as well, which oftentimes means that they're very tolerant to hot and dry weather. Yeah, they're just really nice to drink, to be honest, and very pest resistant as well. So let's get started with regards to the care tips. So the first thing I want to talk about is in relation to propagation. Now, with regards to this plant, it's so easy to propagate, to be honest with you. Now, if you know what stem cuttings are, pretty much it's getting a stem, popping it into soil, and then it will just root. However, they kind of grow like succulents, and what I mean by that is once you pop it into soil, make sure that the soil is actually even dry is fine actually, because what happens is it allows that stem to actually callus and then find its way out to actually look for moisture. Now, once the roots are out, then that's when you actually want to start watering the plant. However, like other plants as well from stem cuttings, they're quite tolerant, and the reason why it's actually okay to treat this kind of like a succulent is because of its features. Okay, it's very hairy, it's got really closed pores, so that means that it won't actually dehydrate quite quickly, and oftentimes it's best grown indoor from what I've found anyway, because often outdoor there's cold, rain, wind. There's also lots of other pests like thrips, which can attack it. However, indoors there isn't really much that can target this. I've even had it sitting at a location that was infested with spider mites, and it didn't affect it as well. So they're very pest tolerant. So this is really a good plant for that. So yeah, with propagation, just stem cutting. All right, now with watering, now this plant is actually one of those plants that has a really nice feature that tells you that it's actually getting dry and actually starting to need water. One of the early telltale signs that this plant actually needs water is that its leaves will actually start to get soft and less bouncy as well. So as I'm touching this, if it's actually bouncy, I know that this plant's still quite hydrated. If it stops getting less bouncy and it actually starts to wilt, then that's an early sign to tell you that, yep, you need to water it. And if you give it tons of water every now and then that it gets soft, it will actually be okay. I've not killed any oregano at all from overwatering, so they're pretty good with that as well. So yeah, just water whenever you think it's drying out. All right, now with soil, now this plant actually has tiny, thin, light roots. And often what that would tell you is they would not need a huge chunky type of mix like aroid mix in their soil. So buying normal potting mix from your nursery is actually, from your big box store or nursery is actually quite fine. It actually likes to have a really hydrated soil. So If the soil is quite dry, the roots can actually die off, and so can the plant, so just be mindful of that. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is in terms of repotting. Now, it's very highly unlikely that I would recommend you repot any type of plants that actually has thin, tiny roots. With this particular plant, it can probably live in a pot for about 5 years before you try to repot it, just because it might get overly root bound. But honestly, because it has thin roots, you could most likely just fertilize that soil to make the most out of it. A lot of the things that it actually needs is more so sunlight and water. If it starts getting quite lightish green, the foliage, then it might actually tell you that it's needing additional nutrients. Otherwise, if it's still showing as vibrant green, then that plant is actually quite fine and healthy as well. Now, often, even though I wouldn't repot this because it can grow quite huge and lengthy as well, what I would do is actually cut it in a way that would make it really bushy. So this particular plant that I'm holding up here is actually just one stem, to be honest with you. However, because of the way I pruned it, it's now grown quite bushy, which is really, really nice. I actually have a bigger one at the back here, if you guys are able to see. And this one's again just one stem, and because of the way I pruned it, it's now grown quite bushy, and there's a lot of growth points as well. So with plants, one of the things that you actually want to make sure has tons and tons of growth points, because if you do, it actually makes it look quite luscious and bushy as well. All right, the next thing I want to talk about with this plant is in relation to lighting. If you put this right next to a window, it can actually thrive with appropriate direct sunlight. Okay, I've noticed that outdoor, if I put it in full direct sunlight, oftentimes the leaves will turn quite pale green. It won't die, but it's just pale green. And I think the reason for that being is that often the cells of that leaf actually sort of doesn't thrive as better as compared to just having partial direct sunlight, and often they might turn quite pale because that photosynthetic part of the plant, which is the chlorophyll, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, is not as efficient and effective when in full direct sunlight. So indoor, they're actually going to thrive quite well. All right, now with misting and humidity. Now, again, part of the nice feature about this plant is its hairy feature. And although to some people that might be scary, it's actually quite good to have that, especially in a dry and arid condition, because often plants that are quite hairy, like some of the cactuses, can actually retain a lot of the moisture. So if you notice, like for example, animals that has a lot of fur, the way that they actually maintain moisture inside of their body is actually through the fur as well. Us humans don't have a lot of hairs in our body because often if we get too hot, we sweat it out and it evaporates, and we've got our skin to maintain our moisture inside as well, and can also help ourselves by drinking water. There's no need to actually mist this plant at all. Now the next thing I'm going to talk about is in relation to fertilizing. Now with this plant, again, it's very rare that I fertilize it. Probably during spring and summer, I would put little granules of those pellet controlled fertilizers, which I use for most of my plants, to be honest. If you use too much of that, it's going to kill your plant because they have a lot of crystallized minerals, and they're actually not healthy for the plants in high concentrated amount. But if you're just putting like a little bit of amount every now and then, it's actually good for your plant. Just make sure that with watering, I didn't mention before, that every now and then that you would actually water from top to bottom and let the water actually drain out into the open and not inside that tray, because often in that tray it could actually have an accumulation of that chemical, and it's not good for the plant if there's too much of that crystallized mineral inside the pot. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is with temperature. And again, this plant is actually quite tolerant with regards to winter, spring, and summer. If it's really hot, again, the plant might actually burn. So morning direct sunlight is actually much more beneficial for this plant rather than having full direct sunlight, especially during summer. All right, now with pests, again, I've talked about before, this plant is quite pest tolerant. I've not seen any pest on it at all except for fungus gnats on the soil. But if you guys want to see that video of what I've made in terms of how to get rid of your fungus gnats, please click on that link down below. I will link that if you guys are interested. And then the last thing I want to talk about with this plant, and I've already mentioned it before, is about the grooming and pruning of it. Okay, so the way I would actually prune and groom this is, as I'm drinking tea, I would actually cut off a stem, okay, and make sure that I leave just 2 leaves down at the base of where I'm cutting from. So for example, with this one, you might be able to see there that there's actually a stump, okay, from where I cut off. That stump will actually grow another set of stems that will actually grow more. And if I trim that again, if I go a little bit closer, if this camera would let me focus. Okay, it's focusing on my face. But basically the rule of thumb is, if you leave 2 leaves at the base of it all the time, it's going to grow another 2 shoots out. From that 2 shoots out, again, leave the base of it when you're trimming it. That 2 leaves will actually grow another 2 sets of stems, so on and so forth, to actually get that bushy kind of look. And that way you have unlimited source of oregano when you're using it as a tea. So that's pretty much it, guys. Again, if you guys are using this as a tea like I am, please do seek medical advice. If you guys are worried, I'm not here to give medical advice. So if there are any issues in relation to allergies, please just make sure that you're really mindful of that. And also, again, don't take my word for it. I'm not a doctor myself. I'm just sharing with you what available resources I've read online, and also based on what we traditionally have used in the Philippines. All right, I hope that you guys have found this video useful. If you have, then please go ahead and click that like button. If you do want to see me make more videos such as this, then please go ahead and click that subscribe button, or suggest to me what type of content you guys might want to watch. Otherwise, I will see you guys on the next video. Until then, goodbye and God bless.